Welcome to Draw Process. I'm Ike. I'm on page 44 of First Sun and Sword, the second page of Farah and what she's doing outside of the throne room where the main action is taking place. I'm going to try to wrap it up on this page, what's happening with Farah, so that I can get back to the main scene more quickly. It's all about pacing. It's all, am I showing the right amount? Am I giving enough interest in what Farah's doing so that you know that what's going on out there and that it's interesting, but not taking too long of a break from the main scene where we want to be focused. So we will see when I thumbnail it and think it through looking at the script if this will be the last page with her. Anyways, here we go. I recorded that intro before drawing the page, and that was before I did the voiceover for last week. So we already know the answer. I managed to get this done in 2 pages. The changes I made to the first page script led to that. So the script. Farah takes out both of the big tough guys by the throne room door. She blocks access to entering the room to the other guards. The other guards rush at her. She lashes at them. She takes them out. She stands guard at the door. There's maybe 4 of them left. They keep their distance. And to each other, they're like, she's blocking the way to the throne room. What is she doing? And she says, "Stand back, you scale lickers. My master will have his test without interruption." So loyal to the end here, letting her master have his test. And she calls them scale lickers. In this comic, I keep coming up with new cuss words, insults, because they serve the reptiles or the lizard people. There's some words choice words for that, and one is scale lickers. So kind of just a fun little way that I have them speak. As I start the thumbnail for this page, I had a picture of this shot in my mind. I start drawing it out. I don't know how much room I really want it to take on a page yet, but I went ahead and refined it. And what I'm figuring out here is, okay, if she is completely in shadow, she'll be this black silhouette on this background. Can I position the camera like this with the boat right there and still not mess up her silhouette? So I'm making it up as I go. As you see, I'm thinking about showing her full figure. I decided to just show her face. So, in a way, I'm trying to actualize images in my mind, and I'm also trying to assemble them into a page, into a set of panels that flow. The script was very loose, but her landing after jumping down from the last page, that was going to be necessary. Them reacting to her seeming intimidating to them. I want to capture that in this moment. That's what I've done in these first 3 panels. And then instead of having her fight any more of them, I decided to just have the soldiers left sort of surround her at the door, deliver their comment about how strange it was that she's blocking the door and not going in and so on. And then her threat to them to stay back while her master fights. So the picture in my mind, we've seen this camera angle earlier for the most part, the first time we saw this space, and notice what I did there. Drew this full panel and I thought, no, I really just need this smaller portion of it. So let's grab that important part, scoot it over, and fit one more panel. So I've got her saying part of her line in the first shot where we see that they've gathered around, and then and I will put their word balloon in the finished page also. And then her final statement about telling them to stand back, her threat in the last panel. I was thinking about doing a series of 3 panels, maybe showing them run up to her in a very small space, working out, the sort of low angle, like But I end up not using that at all, actually. So I'm numbering the panels here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I draw a tiny thumbnail. And so they weren't well organized, so I'm redoing that organization. And that's what I went for. So panel 4, I just remove entirely. So that's the thumbnail. There's a lot that goes into it, arranging of shapes, adjusting the camera angle and everything for the best flow. And then I go in with Sharpie so that you can see it well, and so that I get one more review of the important elements, where the shadows will be and so on. I have that sitting next to me while I draw the page. It's always a challenge to not put too much work into the thumbnail because I'm going to have to redraw it. If I was working digitally or I printed and blew it up or whatever, then I could avoid that step. That's not how I work. So I don't want to put too much time into it, but I can't rush it either. Not too much. We got to get some good visual storytelling in there and things like that. And it still wasn't totally ironed out. Here I'm trying to find my horizon line, the position of everything. I use a lot of one-point perspective. It's a little bit easier that way. Notice I have that. I could have put this at any angle, but to have that vanishing point in the middle of the page behind her, it does help bring things into focus. Like it puts her dead center on a very balanced background. These things can be visually appealing. So, that's why I chose that. It's also easier to draw that way. If I had it skewed to 2-point perspective, it would get a little more difficult to draw as well. She is kneeling down on top of the soldier. The spear is in his back. So I was hoping to capture the point of entry under her right hip. You'll see the spear entering the back of the guy. And how she landed on top of him to break her fall. So her left leg is on his body. She didn't land to the ground directly. And then in perspective, the body of the guy she's killed, laying out to a different vanishing point in a way. So, yeah, very physical, a lot of physicality of the positioning of the figures, the poses that they're in. I generally don't use reference. This is building the figures structurally. Just from practice, knowledge of anatomy, so on, just kind of building that figure in whatever pose I need them to be in, rather than using reference. And that does introduce opportunities for inaccuracy. And you can get, and it takes, it's a lifelong thing that I'll have to get better and better and better at by spending some time using reference in my sketchbook, for example, and working on these skills. But for me, that's what I want to get good at. I might as well start now, rather than developing a practice and a process of making comics that involves a lot of reference and is more cumbersome and is perhaps, digital or something. And then having to do that actively on my work, but I don't know, privately, be trying to build this other practice. I would rather go all in from the start. I was thinking the other day, I think that is something that I have done from the start of making comics in 2015. I didn't worry too much if I wasn't good enough at drawing yet. I just drew. And then I get better and better at drawing, and I let that catch up naturally. I didn't force it. And as that continues to catch up, like, my work will begin, I've noticed, it begins to look better and more, let's say, professional, more refined, more knowledgeable, more skilled. But it sort of occurs naturally over time. So at the starting point, I don't know, that's how it worked for me. And it's totally different for different people, but for me, that approach that is more expressive, less perfectionistic or whatever, that was the approach that I needed to do. I went years without drawing at all until, or pretty much rarely, if at all, until I started making comics. I needed to actually be making them to be able to continue working on it. So it was necessary to just get started in order to keep improving. Sort of that leap of faith at some point, that you'll just start making the comics because that's what you want to do, and you'll let the draftsmanship and skill and anatomy knowledge and everything just catch up with you eventually, and let your flaws be, seen from the start. You'll see I'm penciling this page out pretty quickly. So we have the first panel with that dead center vanishing point. It looks very symmetrical, very balanced. It's even the panel itself is pretty square. It is like a visual stopping point. It's not moving out of the panel. It's like it's still looking. But then other panels have directionality and movement to them, guiding the eye, these sorts of things. So sometimes it's good to have a static looking image. One way of doing that is the symmetry, the centered vanishing point, and so on. The shadow in front of her from the roof, from the building behind her, she's in the shadow, this shadow cast, and you see that edge there. I put that slightly diagonal, and I made sure that it that edge of that shadow, that line where the white and black will meet, ran into the second panel, the top one. If I had moved the shadow down more, or that top panel, if you looked in the thumbnail, it was going to be shorter. It wasn't going to be so tall. And then, so instead, I've made that a very long panel, and the next one very small. And the reason I did that was to make sure the eye goes to that second panel first, and that's why I set up that shadow edge to point at that second panel. So, being concerned with balance, or the symmetry of your panels and stuff. Someone might have just made the second panel there on the right and the one under it equal size. And there would be nothing wrong with that necessarily, but you don't have to do it that way. And part of getting better at comics, as I keep getting better at this, I also get better at pushing things to further extremes, that I can have one big panel with just her head and her hand in the shot, and then a tiny panel that has two figures in it and a word balloon, and a little bit of background. I squeeze that in a smaller panel. So And then I can, having that range allows me to take advantage of that for improved storytelling, improved flow on the page, and things like that. I'm going through now with another layer of pencil. I believe I have grabbed an H, a harder pencil. A softer pencil. The other, I probably started with a 2H. That way, more pencil lead gets left on the page. It looks darker. And I'm going over everything to more clearly define everything. So the most important things, the things that I'm going to need to do it on. So usually the figures and the shadows on figures. This is another one of those steps in the process where I try to not overdo it. Like if I get perfect pencils before I ink, it just takes longer. It makes inking more boring. It actually makes the inking look worse because I'm inking on top of like messy paper where I can't see my inks as well as I put them on. But at the same time, if I don't put enough of it down, then my inks are going to look sloppy. The forms and the lines I choose and the shadows might look more loose and sloppy than they need to. So it's a balancing act to get that right. I think lately I've been doing a good job of drawing most days. There was an issue in the past when if I drew even 3 pages a week, like 3 different days I draw a page, if they weren't back to back, especially, it seemed that I wouldn't feel in the flow with my penciling until I finished penciling a page. And my inking might not feel in the flow until I'm almost done with the page. But especially with the penciling. But now that I've been drawing with, pencil drawing pretty much on a daily basis, my pencil work is getting just more consistent, more in the flow. I'm able to feel warmed up as soon as I start penciling a page instead of at the end. And also by going through the whole page with simpler lines and shapes for representing the figures in the backgrounds and finding the horizon, all that initial penciling I do that's pretty quick, that goes through the page, that's also a warm-up because I'm not going in great detail at that time. So that I'm warmed up by the time I go into greater detail at this point. Her spearhead coming out at the camera. I always find it funny to try to draw a spear or a sword or something that comes to a point. So it tapers in toward the point. But then it's pointing at the camera, so it's growing. It's like the vanishing point is behind it, so it's like it's growing closer to the tip, but it's also tapering in closer to the tip, which is awkward to try to capture. I kind of liked how it turned out, though. And here we go with the inking, 05 micron. The borders are 08, the panel borders. Very small figures on the page. If you add more
lines and detail in figures that are very tiny on your page, which is tempting to do. But if you add more details, like folds in their cape and even the, hands, everything, the more detail you add in that, if you're using a consistent line weight too, it starts to get cartoony. If you want to get more cartoony in how you draw, maybe I think you could intentionally do that, because when I draw very tiny and my pencil weight or my ink weight is so thick that you can't get the details in, then you have to use these simple abstract things to capture it. You could recreate that on a larger space using a much fatter tool, like a big fat Sharpie or something where you can't get the details in. And so see what you come up with, see how it comes out of you. But also when you draw more detail in those little shapes, then there's something to having a consistent style, look to your world. So if there's a bunch of detail in these small figures, then there should be the same amount of detail in the large figures and in the background, large background elements, and so on. If you can see all of the texture and folds in their clothing and in their skin, then why aren't you seeing, all the texture on the ground if it's gravel or sand or whatever? And so once you start adding it for one, it won't look right if you're not adding it for the others too. So, how you manage your smaller figures, your smaller elements. So right here, there's a boat. It's in water. It's like a little pool that enters from the canal or lake, or the portion thereon of this before it hits the sea. There's a little bit of water there. It's in a pretty small space, but how do I indicate that is water without adding a ton of detail in that spot? Because then I need to do the same with everything else. Which, again, it's the idea of cartooning. How can I imply different materials and textures and so on, and what things are with less detail? But they're all related. I think the thing that was probably easier at first with shadow work, and when I was drawing comics, I caught on pretty quickly to realistic shadows, or cast shadows. That would match the light source and where things would fall into shadow. That's not making sense, but that I guess that is your simple standard single light source and then the shadow that's cast. That's your simplest shadow work, blacks to put in on a page. But then you have reflective surfaces, multiple light sources, and things like that. And then it becomes a lot stranger, a lot more difficult to capture. So with my blacks, I'm also capturing form. I use it to indicate depth, to indicate form, on her arm, the spot of her arm that would sort of be not have a highlight on it. I might just throw black on that part. So it's not just like a shadow. And that's where it's fun. That's the most fun part for me, is using shadows in that way. It's similar to I use a dead line, which means my ink lines are all the same thickness. So if I used a different tool, or just in some other way, made the lines thicker, let's say on the bottom of a chin instead of like on top of the head, that thicker line underneath would add weight to it, and it would imply it has a shadow, that the light source is above. It would give it weight, gravity in a sense. And you could do that with line weight. I don't alter my line weight. So to add that weight, I can throw in chunks of black. Okay. But yeah, always more to learn and attempt with that. Yeah, you'll notice like with her hair, her face, her armor. You can get the feeling it's reflective down on her breastplate and on the straps that go over the shoulder, because of the way that I put it in black but left highlights and spots. So yeah. Yeah, always more to learn with that. I like art styles that use line weight and use like not putting shadow. Maybe they use color, line weight, or even other graphic tricks to create depth and so on. I like that kind of stuff too. It's not really how I approach it though. Here I have my white paint brush pen, so it's basically white out, and I was putting that in a few spots, and then going back with my ink to close anything that needed to be finished up. So here is the finished page, and I'm not sure how long this page took, but the last one I did, what would that be? This is 44, 45, maybe it was 46. Hour and a half. It was actually an hour and a half, start to finish on the page, not counting the thumbnail. But that was excellent time. Someone had recently asked, and I think I was saying 2 to 4 hours, to do this, and it looks like that's about right. But then, of course, I have to scan it, color, and letter the page, and that goes pretty quickly too, because I keep the colors simple in the lettering too. But yeah, there's our finished page, and now we'll be back into the throne room with King Croc and sword fighting, and it's gonna get nasty. So that'll be nice. Okay, I'll see you next week.